you're in. I'm Wenran Jiang, and I serve on the advisory board of IPD, mainly focusing on the China and Asia programs. And welcome back for those who have been with us since yesterday. And for those who just joined us now, this is the second day of the East Asian Strategy Forum organized by Toronto-based Institute for Peace and Diplomacy. And our session is the virtually lunchtime keynote featuring Professor Jeffrey Sachs. Professor Sachs, very nice to see you again.
Thank you.
I would like to welcome you on behalf of IPD, our colleagues, and the live audience today. To most of us, of course, Professor Sachs needs no introduction. In our academic world, my colleagues, myself, used his books and his articles over the years for our undergrad courses, graduate seminars. And Professor Sachs, of course, is a university professor and director of the Center for Sustainable Development at Columbia University. For many decades, among many roles, Professor Sachs has served as an advisor to 3 United Nations Secretaries General and currently serve as a UN Sustainable Development Goals advocate under Secretary General Antonia Augustis. Professor Sachs was twice named among Time magazine's 100 most influential world leaders and was ranked by The Economist magazine among the top 3 most influential living economists. Since Professor Sachs has many commitments and he will be with us for only 30 minutes today, we would like to have him longer, but he has a busy schedule. He will speak for the first 15, 20 minutes. If we have time, we will do a Q&A discussion. And now, Professor Sachs, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. And we certainly will have time because I will keep my remarks brief to enable us to have some discussion. Thank you to IPD for your important work. We need, most important of all, to keep a high level of cooperation across the major regions of the world. And in recent years, as everybody knows, instead of that high level of cooperation, we have been veering more and more towards confrontation and towards a sense of even Cold War, which crept into our rhetoric and then became mainstream in our rhetoric. I attribute most of this to the United States. Because I believe that what has happened most basically is that China's economic success has really unnerved American policymakers. They don't know how to address it. So rather than attribute the increased tensions to specific actions by China or specific provocations, I believe that what we are witnessing is more structural, but no less worrisome. And that is that with China's economic rise, and especially with China's increasing technological sophistication, American policymakers went into a mode of confrontation on the view that US primacy in the world, US dominance of technological and military and economic and financial systems was threatened. And since China was the source of that threat, the US needed a new kind of confrontation with China. And of course, the US is trying to bring other countries into that confrontation, including Canada, including the European Union, including the countries of the Asia-Pacific region, notably India, Australia, Korea, and Japan. I don't like this approach of the United States. I've written a couple of books recently saying that this is not the right way to think about our global scene. We're interconnected, mutually interdependent, and we broadly benefit from the success of others. We are not weakened by the success of others. The world is not a zero-sum game. It is a positive-sum game where cooperation leads to positive benefits for all parties. So I have my thoughts and analysis about how things have unfolded, but to be very brief, by around 2012 or 2014, China reached equality with the United States in overall size of the economy, measured in purchasing power adjusted prices, still less in US dollar prices. But the point is, China became certainly the #2 economy in the world, and arguably the largest economy in the world. In per capita terms, still much less than the United States, again, depending on how things are measured. But China also in 2014, with the Made in China policy, Made in China 2025, announced the intention to become a world leader in 10 consequential areas of technology. Well, that's fine with me too, because China's technologies will also be beneficial for the whole world. But the United States was really deeply unnerved by this, and unnerved, for example, by China's early advance on 5G. And that's why the US launched a war on Huawei, not because Huawei was dangerous per se, but rather because the US didn't have 5G capacity. And so the US decided to try to catch up on 5G by stopping Huawei. And it's had a real impact on Huawei by banning exports of the very high-end microprocessors to Huawei, and that has damaged significantly product lines for Huawei in the short term. But again, I don't believe that Huawei posed any security threat. I believe that this was interstate competition in an unfair way, in my view, by the United States. Well, a lot of my fellow countrymen don't agree with me, and they accuse me of all sorts of things. But this is my absolute independent view, not motivated by anything except my own observations about what is at stake here. So I have been urging cooperation, and I would say that the last couple of months have been probably on net rather helpful. Because the US and China signed a cooperative accord at COP26, which was clearly led by Special Envoy Kerry with his counterpart Xi Jinping, the China climate negotiator. And this said that the two countries would cooperate on climate. This is extremely important, because together they constitute more than 40% of global emissions to begin with, so it's very important. But it also provides a framework and umbrella for exchange of ideas, knowledge, and so forth. Then the Biden-Xi summit of the last a few days ago, I think is also basically a good step forward. One of the great flashpoints in recent years is Taiwan, and Taiwan should not be a flashpoint. All countries should agree on a one China policy. Taiwan should not be misled in any way to think that the United States would support independence of Taiwan. This is an extremely dangerous would be an extremely dangerous situation and a big misunderstanding by Taiwanese leaders if they said, well, the US is going to defend us, so we declare independence. This would be rather reckless and very dangerous for the world. So at the summit, I think there was more clarity where President Biden was very explicit that the United States supports the one China policy, called for the status quo in the Straits. And this is basically what we need. We need to calm things down. And especially we need responsibility by Taiwanese officials not to provoke conflict, and certainly not to believe that the United States would militarily defend Taiwan in the event of a unilateral action by Taiwan on independence, which would be a horrible mistake for Taiwan and for the world. So I think that there was progress also made at the summit. There still is a lot of tension. We have a lot of members of Congress that are very nationalistic. This is perhaps not surprising. It seems to go with the political territory. I don't know how many of these nationalists actually owns a passport. And of those who own a passport, I don't know how many have ever been to China, but not too many. And they're certainly pretty ignorant in general. So I am underwhelmed by the knowledge of our political class as a general principle. But we have these hardline rhetoric, the nationalist rhetoric. I think Biden tries to not provoke them. So there's a lot of hard talk. We're tough. We're not going to give in. China's unfair. Most of this is for domestic political consumption, I believe, not for substance. And some of it is inevitable, but it should not get out of hand. And Canada certainly needs good, open relations with China and should not fall into some kind of simplistic model of China bashing or anti-China alliance. And I'm also concerned about recent statements that NATO is going to have a new doctrine also directed to China. This would be a huge mistake. That would be a real escalation. NATO is not, should not be engaged in issues about China. And I'm hoping that when cooler heads prevail, there will be much more care on that issue when NATO actually unveils its new security doctrines in the middle of 2022. So this is my basic point. We absolutely need to tone down the temperature. There's a lot to cooperate on. I think the US has been the main instigator of these tensions. Of course, we had Donald Trump as president, and he, in my book, rates as the worst president in American history, and provoked a lot of this. But it means that the American public is rather riled up, and our mainstream media are very tough talking, and our political class is very tough talking. So we're still, I think, in need of climbing back from the provocative language and actions of recent years. I'll stop there, turn it back over to you.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Jeffrey, if I may. Very thoughtful comments touching upon many of the issues. Of course, this audience, we have government officials, policymakers, primarily a Canadian audience, and also people around the world. I know people are tuning in from Australia, Europe, and we have actually quite a bit of debate in the past day and a half already. Some of the issues you mentioned, people actually touched upon, including some of your colleagues from American military background, academic background. So we also have watched you active, giving many speeches. Here in Canada, I would like to explore your expertise because of the Canadian context, a Canadian conference. You know, with the Meng Wanzhou and the two Michaels that we call the crisis now resolved. I know you have advocated and criticized the Trump administration moved to arrest Madame Meng. You made your position on Huawei quite clear. I won't pursue that further. But now, after what we call the 3 M's crisis resolved, with a new minority liberal government in place, Canada is trying to set some new China policy directions. And we're looking at the United States-China interaction dynamics, which you highlighted here. And then we watch European allies like UK and Australia very closely. So in your opinion, I want to explore with you further, you touched upon Canada. What Canada as a middle power, or some people argue we're no longer now a middle power given our status of primarily sticking with American policy lines. What is your advice to our policymakers, academics here in Canada, and the live audience in Canada's pursuit of a balanced relationship? We're very dependent on the United States. You know that very well, obviously, economically. But China is fast growing in recent years, our largest trading partner, which has the combined volume of UK, France, plus Japan, maybe Germany combined. But it's significant, even far behind the United States. What is your take on the Canadian approach in dealing with potentially a China situation here?
I think in general, it is important for America's allies not simply to quietly fall into line with American foreign policy, because American foreign policy is not accurate right now. A dominant feeling in the foreign policy establishment is to create an anti-China alliance. And the US counts on, of course, the UK, which never deviates from the United States. It would take Canada as given as following the US line. It has entered into this new AUKUS three-way arrangement with Australia, which was just heatedly and blisteringly attacked by Keating recently, saying how ridiculous for Australia to do this. And I agree with that, by the way. So if there are Australians on the line, this is not right. It's not good for Australia. And it's a kind of knee-jerk reaction. And it is basically saying, okay, we'll put all of our dependence on the US. And boy, I wouldn't do that, period. Because, the US, we can see we're an unstable country to begin with. Not such good judgment on foreign policy over the last 50 years. Far too many wars, far too hot-headed, a lot of arrogance, a lot of ignorance, a lot of lost wars, a lot of lost causes. So I think what America's friends should be doing is saying to America, calm down. We don't want a Cold War, and you don't want a Cold War. And there's no winning a Cold War. In fact, a divided world is a loss for everybody. It's very dangerous. It makes every kind of global problem solving much harder. It poses enormous risks to our own lives and our own quality of life. Think of American universities, how they're afraid to deal with China right now. They're called out for having normal academic relations with China. That's horrible. Are we kidding? But this is happening right now. So I think that Canada can play a very important role. I've always said Canada's, the decent conscience of North America, and it's really important because America is a very strange country, very strange culture, very divided country, whereas Canada has its act together much more in normalcy clear thinking, and so on. So I think the role Canada can play is not a break with the US. There's a long border that makes that not so smart, a profound economic, cultural, personal interdependence that makes it impossible, but guidance and saying to the US, really tone it down. And let's for sure not get into the rhetoric. By the way, I think the Canadian Parliament voted, if I'm not mistaken, voted about Xinjiang being a genocide.
Yeah.
This is a mistake. Xinjiang may have many human rights violations and many legitimate concerns, but this kind of loose language that is so charged that it's a genocide, and rather than saying we need the UN to investigate the human rights and so forth, this is the kind of thing that worries me, because it is this maximal rhetoric, this maximal confrontation mode that is what gets us into a lot of trouble, as if these things don't have costs. Of course they have costs. And by the way, I'll just say it again, I think it is clear, do not arrest senior executives over extraterritorial US sanction claims. How could anybody think that this is a reasonable thing to do? How would it be if China started grabbing US executives because they violated some claim of China on extraterritorial law? But that's the US provocation. And it was not smart of China to get into the middle of that. And that's where I think China's intelligence in the smarts can really make a difference. Help keep the US more balanced. This is an important role.
Yeah. So of course, you mean that it's not for Canada to be smart to get into the middle of this between US and China, right? Yeah.
Yes, and more than that, to tell the US don't get into it.
Yeah.
We're your best friends, we're your neighbors, we live together with you. Don't create this kind of global crisis.
Interesting, because I know we have parliamentarians online in our conference sessions. We do have a vote of 266 to 0. Many of the Liberal, the whole cabinet abstained. Is not binding, but only Canada is among a few parliaments with Holland voted that way. But what do you say to those people in Canada that will literally advocate elevating Canada's relations with Taiwan to official status, trying to paint China as a new evil empire? They want to even out-hawk the Trump hawks in the United States. There are advocates in Canada, even broadly, we're very moderate people here at the culture as a country, as you mentioned, but we do have people really pushing, even a little bit of moderate people saying after the two Michaels arrest, very bitter. The word is, we cannot forgive, we cannot forget. We need to get together with our allies as if there is some kind of a united allies strategy towards China, which you said is confusing even for the Americans. What do you say to those people who are pushing for a hard line? You've been to China in previous conversations since 1981, every year. You're the experts. You've been to Xinjiang, Tibet, and all that. What do you say to these people of painting China as a new evil, of the other, of the one that we must contain? Maybe you can elaborate a little bit on that.
First of all, thank you. A philosophy that says never forgive, never forget is a philosophy that will doom the world to endless conflict until we destroy each other. So that is a completely dead-end, anti-ethical point of view. Never forgive, never forget. Who could live on such a principle? And all of this very strong chest pounding is absolutely a wrong way to approach almost anything in life, but especially bilateral relations between two major countries. Because, of course, what we need to do is live with each other, accommodate, find how we can reach new agreements, and also not believe in the purity of our actions and the evil of the other side. I often remark that since 1980, China has not been involved in a single overseas conflict. And the United States has been involved in nothing but war the whole time. Is that really Canada's ideals? America's unilateral war in Iraq, is that Canada's ideals? Did the US do a great job destabilizing Afghanistan in 1979 by supporting the Mujahideen and bringing that country to 41 years of nonstop war? Was that the great example? How about destabilizing the Syrian government? How about bombing Yemen? Which of these does Canada like in this? How about the Contra Wars? Your next door neighbor, my country, is a semi-crazy country. So if you said never forgive, never forget, you'd have nothing but anguish with your southern neighbor. And to think that China's the evil when it hasn't been in one overseas war. Okay, now let's take another issue. China is the aggressive, militarized country. Okay, you know that your southern neighbor, by the way, I used to live in Detroit, and Canada was my southern neighbor, Windsor. So it was flipped for in that one place. But I'm going to say that the U.S. is your southern neighbor. Your southern neighbor has 800 overseas military bases. China has one in Djibouti, a small naval refueling base. The US has 800 overseas military bases. Is China really the aggressive power? Or what the US calls the Indo-Pacific, which is, by the way, just a nasty way to not say South China Sea. It's only a psychological term. It's not anything more serious than that, in my view. But the US has military bases all around the Asia Pacific. And then it says to China, oh, look at them, they're aggressive. They're putting a base on an atoll. This is not right. Or even the nuclear issue right now. China is increasing its nuclear, its strategic capacity. The United States has several thousand nuclear warheads. At least, probably, well, depending on how you count, something like 6,000 compared to something like 400 of China. So the real question is, the United States needs to disarm under the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty. That's an obligation. We should be negotiating disarmament and not pointing the finger unilaterally at China. So I think the first point is to say China's evil compared to who is a huge mistake. It's just wrong. Everybody does some things that nobody should approve of in public policy, but I don't see it as one side evil, one side with all these wonderful values. Life is not like that. Second, what is China's mindset? China's mindset goes back to the last 200 years, in which Britain launched the first Opium Wars in 1839 to divide China. Then it invaded, it burned down the Summer Palace. It instigated disaster in China. It then created extraterritorial rights, the Boxer Rebellion, the Boxer Indemnity, the loss of China's territory, the weakening of China until the failures of China in the Versailles Treaty, the Japanese invasion of China. China had a miserable 180 years. And what they saw was that the outside world was constantly trying to dismember China. And so they view Taiwan from that perspective. This is not good faith. This is trying to pull China apart. That's why the one China policy is so central to China's foreign policy, because the outside world spent 180 years trying to dismember China, trying to control it. So have some caution, for heaven's sake, and how irresponsible it would be to break the one China policy by Canadian right-wingers or American right-wingers and so forth. Don't create such a disaster. Mm-hmm. And understand what prudence is in this world. Prudence is not to provoke disaster. Mm-hmm. And that's, I think, on Taiwan, that's probably one of the most dangerous flashpoints on the whole planet, because China will defend one China. And there are a lot of hotheads in Taiwan that are using language that is absolutely dangerous, thinking that somehow the US is going to come to their rescue. And that's very dangerous too.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much, because that actually cleared up quite a bit regarding the follow-up questions I have from audience on Taiwan. Interestingly, you clarified for our audience in the West better than the White House release, which does not cover the summit discrepancy between China's position saying Biden did promise not to support Taiwan independence and is binding to Taiwan Relations Act, which China does not acknowledge. But China does report that Biden also acknowledging to follow the one China policy. You cleared a lot of that. It's very good. I won't raise that issue again, but I want to end the session. I know you are on the time constraint here by summarizing some of the questions people asked. Dynamics you characterized well, but you also made it very clear in other places you did too, that this U.S.-China relations, the deteriorating situation in recent years, resting on the shoulders of the American government, the messy policy, the debate or no policy at all. I have a good friend, an expert himself, Rob Norris, a former minister of number of positions in the province of Saskatchewan, himself a student of international affairs. He asked me to thank you for your insight, but asking the question, many seem to be wondering, isn't this is a question of what we have, U.S.-China dynamics as a kind of a mutual imaging or mirror imaging situation. How do you see looking forward? You talk about collaboration on climate change issues. In other places, you raise the issue as utmost important, much more important than all the traditional security of arms race and all that. So his question is, how do we deal with the dynamic of kind of a mirror imaging here?
I think that we need lots of dialogue and trialogue. Canada should be part of this, and Europe should be a part of this. We need open channels of discussion. That's why I really appreciated the Biden-Xi meeting. But it seems to me in the world of Zoom, they should have that once a month. They don't have to have that as some summit where it's just this profound preparation. Of course, I don't like leaders in a completely ad hoc way doing things. So it should be prudently done, but it should be more routinely done. We're concerned about this. We don't understand this. But then there should be staffing beyond that, very intensive discussions on an ongoing basis of the finance ministry of China and the US Treasury, or in the energy sector for the energy transition, or countless other issues that are issues of common concern. I think when you're face to face, it's hard to play the games that we tend to play of you're evil, I'm all good, which is what you do when you're writing op-eds or giving speeches and chest pounding and so on. It's interesting, by the way, as you said, after the summit, the communication directly between the leaders was quite reasonable. If you look at the readout of what was said by each side, they both behaved very well. As soon as it ended, the US briefing was, we were tough. We're going to show them how tough we are. We're not going to give in on this and that. Why? Because it's all for the US domestic audience. Because Biden's conception is not about China, it's about the Republicans. And he does not want to look soft. And this is so much of what's going on. And remember, ponder this. The United States had Donald Trump as president. It's shocking. The man's a psychopath, I'm sorry to say. And yet he was president of the United States. And that's how dangerous and messed up we are right now. We're a little bit unstable in the US. And so what I'm really trying to argue is, sorry to say it, it sounds almost contradictory, but we need to calm things down. Because even for our own souls in the United States, if things get tense, the screaming, we've got Ted Cruz, we've got Abbott, we've got DeSantis. You can't imagine what our politics is like right now. We have people who are so determined to prove how nationalistic they are, how hardline they are, how tough they are. And that's what is keeping President Biden looking over his shoulder. But if we institutionalize the discussions, the talk, bureaucracy, which I like, of different governments working with each other, making the G20 process work effectively. And I think that's an important place where Canada can really participate very fruitfully, is in the G20 context, because that institutionalizes places where the US and China are talking. And by the way, even co-chairing the sustainable finance track. So by institutionalizing these linkages, I think we will really tone down the quite real dangers of things getting out of hand. And when I look at American history, the biggest risk is us, which is things getting out of hand and then one darn thing leading to another, which is, by the way, how we ended up at the Cuban Missile Crisis, which nearly blew up the whole world because so many miscalculations, and I won't go into the whole story, but it wasn't just Nikita Khrushchev putting missiles in Cuba. It was the Bay of Pigs invasion by the United States before. It was lying by American presidents to the Soviet Union on repeated occasions. It was many miscalculations that then spilled into a near global disaster. And that's what I want to see best, how we can prevent. And it seems to me the way you prevent one darn thing from escalating is to be careful with each darn thing you do, that you're not provoking a reaction. So to anyone that's going to give this never forgive, never forget, all this, that's very dangerous. No, thank you.
Okay, this is great, Jeffrey. I know you need to go, but I cannot help but have to raise the final question, which you're the expert. The climate collaboration you mentioned multiple times. Canada's in a tough spot. I'm sitting here talking to you from Alberta. We're an energy producing province. We need the sector for now, even for transition. US no longer want to take much of our oil and gas because its own supply has risen in past 10, 15 years. We have trouble diversifying to West Coast to China. And yet we have a debate about fossil fuels what is you see that Canada can do together with China and the United States as an overriding climate change policy coordination leadership role in actually going beyond all the stuff that you would discuss about, just Taiwan, the arms race, the nuclear weapons. Could you give us Canadian policymakers, especially what Canada can do in kind of balance between the economic resource extraction and commitment to climate change? We actually have a new environment minister who used to be a Greenpeace activist, right? So very interesting situation, you know that. So give us some advice at the last sum up question, if you may.
Sure. We are going to decarbonize because the climate crisis is deep and accelerating. So Alberta has to come to grips with that in the same way that Texas has to come to grips with that. There are not many choices, but this is why the Keystone pipeline in the end proved unviable. It's why the Trans Mountain pipeline, I think, is unviable. It's why the idea of Canada going to net zero at home, but continuing to export abroad is not viable. We need different answers. The only use of fossil fuel in the future will be if it is combined with carbon capture and storage in some way. So if the fossil fuels can be used, maybe stripped of the carbon to make a hydrogen economy, Alberta could be a world leader in the hydrogen economy. Not impossible. If you become a major producer of hydrogen with the complete storage, I'll support pipelines of that hydrogen because that's part of the solution. So it is a technology question to face. It is not a question of will we or won't we decarbonize, because what's happening is that every year or two or three, the environmental crises become more and more dramatic. And so the politics will continue to shift, accelerate towards decarbonization. What happened at COP26 is almost all the world said net zero by 2050, 2060, or 2070 in the case of India. Even Saudi Arabia, net zero. Russia, net zero. Amazing. Why? Because basically the alternative is becoming unbearable. And wait till the next El Nino. It's going to be devastating. We could jump to 1.35 degrees C above pre-industrial shortly. Even the World Meteorological Organization said we could be at 1.5 degrees for a year or two if an interannual variation within the next several years. This is going to accelerate action. And Canada, like the United States, has this deep geographical politics. Alberta based in Canada, Texas based in the United States. So we've been torn in domestic politics for a long time. Till today, we can't pass a law in the US Senate because Manchin is blocking it now from West Virginia. But let me just make a clear prediction. We are going to decarbonize. And so if you're going to use fossil fuel, it's going to have to be with storage and sequestration. And this is the bottom line. And then there are many, many options to do that. But simply exporting fossil fuels will not be one of them. And this will become more and more clear in the future years.
Well, with that note, thank you very much, Professor Sachs, for the insight and sharing much over the time that you allowed with us. I know you have other commitments, so thank you on behalf of IPD, of our audience, and a program note for those who are going to continue with the next panel, starting panel 6 at 1:30 Eastern, shortly, titled Troubled Waters, Averting War in the South China Sea and Taiwan. Again, thank you, Professor Sachs. Great to see you again.
Great, so great to be with you.